most important thing about Rajni is her heart and soul. And the most important reason why we love having you come back to us, Rajni, is because your heart and soul shine forth when you are speaking to us from this podium, or even just sitting outside with us to have coffee afterwards. We know when there's somebody who is an inspiration, like my sister, who gets other people excited about positive change. And this is why we love to have you come back again. So, will you all help me to welcome Rajni Shankar-Brown back to us. It is if you turn the button so it turns green, it'll come on.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You know, I have to tell you, my dimples always hurt when I come here because I get so happy seeing all of you. And I'm so excited to be back, and I am thankful to see everything is safe here and that all of you are well, even though I know there are so many challenges in our communities across the landscape of the U.S., but especially in Florida right now. Having Hurricane Nicole come right after Ian, it's been tough, and especially tough for all the individuals, families, children and youth, so many elderly that are unhoused. Really, really tough. And I want to thank all of you with my fullest of hearts for donating and raising and bringing bags and doing so much to support, because we need that. There's a lot of work to be done right now in our world, and we are being called on to rise in our communities and to do good. So today I'm going to share with you on empathy, cultivating empathy and cultural humility. So I'm really excited to talk about this, especially because if we're going to create justice, this is a really big part of that work. So I have a diagram here that I pulled up, and I love this. It's a visual made by Tony Ruth, and I think it's really great, and it gives us something to contemplate. So, if you think about inequality, right, you have one person here who is not getting any apples, all the apples are coming over here. Equality says, okay, we're going to give both of them a ladder, and while that's great that we're giving them both a ladder, it still does not help the person over here. Equity says, okay, we're going to redistribute. We're going to make sure that we are personalizing the supports we are given to make sure that we actually have equality. You have to have equity in order to have equality. So now, giving this person a larger ladder, we're able to access the apples. My hope is that we also stay focused on justice. Justice is hard work. It calls on us to reimagine. It calls on us to use our diverse skill sets and tap into our agency. It calls on us to be willing to also sacrifice and struggle, as Dr. King so eloquently reminded us. And so here, you actually see the root being addressed. So it's not just about the ladder access. How do we actually straighten this tree and make sure the growth of the apples are distributed where everybody gets to have access, gets to enjoy and thrive, right? I love this image. And apples, they are super healthy, by the way. So enjoy an apple as well this fall. I think it's such a good fall treat. So when you think about empathy, there are a lot of different terms that exist in the world. A simple definition people kind of put out there is that you are working to understand somebody else's feelings and feel with them. Very different than sympathy, where you're feeling sorry for someone, right? And that's okay to feel sympathy, but it's not enough, right? Empathy actually allows us to go into a different space, which also weaves in agency and action. Now, I love to push us all to think about moving even further into radical empathy. Isabel Wilkerson, you'll remember, some of you came to my talk on CAST, and you remember from ZPI. In CAST, I love how Isabel Wilkerson describes radical empathy. She says radical empathy means putting in the work, to educate oneself and to listen with a humble heart, to understand another's experience from their perspective, not as we imagine we would feel. I'm going to pause for a moment there. So traditionally, empathy has been taught. Often people will say, put yourself in someone else's shoes. Radical empathy acknowledges that sometimes we cannot put ourselves in someone else's shoes. And in fact, doing so can perpetuate harm. To say that, oh, I understand, when maybe we've never had that reality or experience. Radical empathy says, it's not about that, but it's about imagining, not about imagining how we would feel, but it's about really opening ourselves to listen and to try to understand, right? So we can all do that. We can open ourselves up to listen. Isabel Wilkerson says, radical empathy is not about you and what you think you would do in a situation you have never been in and perhaps never will. It is the kindred connection from a place of deep knowing that opens your spirit to the pain of another as they perceive it. Kindred connection. I love that. And our song we opened with today, reminding us of that connection, even through multi-generations, reminding us that we are one. And how beautiful when we share our joys and concerns, we remember that your joy and concern is also my joy and concern. We share collectively as a community. And so radical empathy, again, it's about kindred connection. It's about listening. It's about seeking to understand, but honoring someone else's perspective and their experiences. Really honoring that. So when we think about culture, I have some artwork here. This is called Parts of Whole, and it's artwork by Cindy Bernier. And you see a lot of movement, a lot of colors, right? But this idea really affirms and gets at this idea of culture. Because culture, the word itself, it refers to values, beliefs, perceptions, relationships, attitudes, practices, rituals, routines, rules, so many different things. This is a word that is multifaceted. And also, culture can be very different for each person. It's something that can be passed down generation to generation. It can also be changed generation to generation. And it's more than just ethnicity and race, right? It goes beyond that. And culture is often learned. We learn it through experiences, through our interactions, through our own metacognitive formations. But here's the thing. Culture is very, very diverse. And in order to understand someone's culture, we have to take time to really listen and get to know that person, to hear their stories and their experiences, and be willing to suspend our own judgment and our own biases. So again, it is work, right? It is work that we have to engage in, very active work. And there are key attributes here to cultural humility that I want to go over, but I want to give you a little bit of context about this term itself. So cultural humility is a term that comes actually first out of the public health or medical field. So two women, doctors, Melanie Turbalon and Jan Marie Garcia, they were both doctors and realized that a lot of times in medical schools, they were teaching under the framework of cultural competence. And this still happens even in education programs, medical school social work programs, but they also realize this is problematic, right? So cultural competence, while there are pieces that are very useful, there are pieces that also can be problematic and not work, because it is assuming that we can be competent in someone else's culture. It's also assuming that once we are competent, right, it's like a checkbox. Okay, I'm done, I understand, boom. And that's not really how culture, how humans work. Cultural humility is different because it really focuses on lifelong learning. And I really find, actually, if you look at the Unitarian Universalist principles, I love it because it aligns so closely with the framework of cultural humility. I love how when you all gather, you're always learning. When we sit under the conversation tree outside and talk, right, we're listening to each other's stories and taking a moment to open ourselves up to honor each other as human beings. And that's beautiful. It's also really important. And so these two doctors had noticed that in the medical field, lots of hosts of research for decades and decades have shown disparities, especially racial and ethnic disparities in the health field. So one would be thinking about pregnancy-related deaths. Black and brown women, much, much higher rates of pregnancy-related deaths, up to 3 times higher. When you start to look at even cardiovascular disease, diabetes and access to treatments, they started to see these disparities again that were really glaring. And when they started to dig into this more, they found it wasn't only about access to public health and medicine and care, it was about quality of care as well. And we saw this really, really strongly echoed during COVID-19. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Black and brown communities, but especially women, were disproportionately impacted and have died. Our tribal nations have lost many, many mothers, sisters, aunts, friends, warriors, and it's devastating. And so going back and saying, okay, we've got to rethink how we are teaching and educating and even cultivating in ourselves a new framework, a framework that advances equity and advances justice is so important. And so the term was coined in 1998. So in the 90s, this term really came about. And here are some of the different key attributes you can see. Openness, being willing to be open. And we live in a time right now, especially in our state, where it's pretty scary. In fact, it's pretty terrifying. You think about legislation that's being pushed. There's a lack of openness and a lack of love. And it's dangerous because people's lives are impacted and affected, and communities are impacted in very, very real ways. In fact, I'll just share with you something, at the national level we're working on. We just had a big summit yesterday, looking again at the humanitarian crisis of homelessness in our nation. And we have devastating legislation being passed right now across the US, where even to be in an encampment site, if you are sleeping outdoors, you can get arrested and get a felony in certain states like Tennessee. That's absurd. If people do not have access to affordable housing, they're trying to find a place to survive and to sleep. They're pushed out onto the streets, and now we're going to criminalize and penalize this? What does that say about our society? We have to do better. We must do better. We have our children so often start their school day by doing the pledge, and they end by saying liberty and justice for all. We need to make sure that those are more than words, empty words, and glossy rhetoric that we tell our kids to say, but actually translate and manifest that. Another big piece is self-reflection and awareness. This is actually huge. So cultural competence, I'm going to kind of show the difference here. Cultural competence starts from a place of saying, we're going to learn all about another culture. Cultural humility says, we're going to learn about other cultures, but we're first going to start by learning about ourselves. We're first going to start by unpacking the biases that we all carry, understanding the things that have shaped our own lenses, how we see the world, how we navigate the world. And then we're going to understand how that interacts in relationships, in structures and policies and systems in our nation. Lifelong learning. This is the number one thing. Again, when we're talking about culture, when we're talking about justice, it is not a checkbox. It is ongoing work, and it requires of each of us lifelong learning, an active pursuit of lifelong learning. Learning in all different types of contexts, but especially learning from each other. Taking time to understand each other, listen to each other's stories and experiences, and making sense of that and connecting that into the framework of our world. Institutional accountability. So this is another big piece. Cultural humility, and humility, the word itself comes from the Latin word humilitas. And that word actually means humble. It also means grounding. It also means from the earth. I find that really, really beautiful. And if you think about this idea of our shared humanity, we are all stardust. We are all connected. We come from a womb. We return back into the universe, no matter what faith you believe. Right? We all have different beliefs, and that's beautiful. But there are certain parts that even with our differences, there are so many similarities. You only have to peel back our skin. In fact, again, even race, we talk about race because we have to, because it exists in our society, but scientifically and biologically speaking, we know it's a social construct, that we are 99.9% the same. That is what science shows us. Amazing. So again, thinking about that and thinking about empathy and compassion and cultivating that. Empathy and compassion are skills. Just like anything else, it's like a muscle. You gotta work it. Sometimes people think, oh, it's just innate and natural. And what they're finding is, to a certain degree, we have that as humans, but we actually have a lot of different things right now in our world that actually start to lessen our organic empathy. Part of that is compassion fatigue. So much going on in the world, in the news, it's very easy to kind of shut down, to feel apathetic. We see that right now. We're doing a lot of focus groups and surveys with youth around the nation, and a lot of our young people, they're very openly, saying they're shut down. It's not that they want to be, they're overwhelmed with the world that they're living in. So one of the tonics, right, that we have to actively pursue is empathy and compassion, and we have to cultivate that. We have to intentionally build spaces like this that allow us to cultivate that. That's really, really important. I tell my own kids, right, it's just like if you want to get good at basketball, right, you practice, you use it. It's the same thing. The more you love, the love grows, it magnifies. And you want to be present and be in a state of love, right? And be able to feel that. It's really important to our world, and our world needs it in every sort of way. To be able to put ourselves in other people's, honoring other people, I'll put it that way, right? And to be able to say, we're gonna not place ourselves as the center of everything. but we're gonna actually step back and be able to look at other experiences and truths in our world as well. This is really important. If you look at even curriculum in schools, in public schools in the United States, for a very, very long time, we've taught a lot of history in very biased ways. Even maps. It's really interesting how for a very, very, I mean, it's only starting to shift in some districts now, but our maps have been very, very biased, where actually Western countries and even the United States have been much, much larger in the maps than Asia and Africa. And there's these implicit kind of messages, right? Hidden curriculum, we call it the hidden curriculum, where then, children and youth grow up thinking, we are the center, right? These are small countries, and actually in China, that happens a lot too. So I work often with schools around the globe, and I noticed in many of the maps in schools there, China is huge and everybody else looks really small. And so it's really interesting to think about the messages that we send. What stories do we tell? What stories do we exclude? And what does that mean? So making sure that we are being open to centering other experiences as well. And then acknowledging power imbalances and balancing power imbalances as well. Making sure that we acknowledge we live in a world of hierarchies. We live in a world, as Isabel Wilkerson put it, where we have a caste system, very active caste system. So how do we think about those power imbalances, but not only acknowledge, work to change and to dismantle? And there's a false belief that, if we focus on equity and we give somebody a little more here, right, we're gonna lose. And that's actually not true. All of us do better. Communities thrive and are healthier when everybody has human rights, fundamental human rights. And in the US, to think we are one of the wealthiest nations in the world and have so many without fundamental human rights, it's devastating. So Melanie Turbalon, Dr. Turbalon says the ultimate goal of cultural humility is a sense of equity, equality, respect that drives us forward. To be culturally humble means that I am willing to learn. That is really at the roots, that I am willing to learn. I am also accepting that I do not know everything, and that's okay. Right? But what isn't okay is when we learn to not use that learning, especially if we know we're injuring someone or a community. If we know that, we should change our actions. When we know better, as Maya Angelou put it, when we know better, do better. Right? That's important. So again, lifelong reflective learning, respectful partnerships that recognize power imbalances, and then thinking about institutional accountability. And this really goes into even structures and systems, right? So even I'm so happy to hear people bring up elections today, right? And good for you, putting that sign in your yard, right? I mean, but this is, where's the accountability, right? And we have to hold each other accountable. And so this really makes up kind of the dynamic of cultural humility. And what I would share is, even though this originated in the medical field, it has now really, really evolved where it is now applied across all fields. Education, social work, psychology. Cultural humility is a concept now that really, really has extended across the fields. But again, I want us to not think about this just in isolation, but to think about it in terms of the connection to justice. When we think about advancing justice, humans are central to that. And we have to take time to get to know each other as humans. If you think about a lot of hate, so we've had an increase of hate crimes in the United States, massive increase. really, it's terrifying to even pull up hate groups now and see the number of hate groups that are popping up in Florida. We have an explosion of hate groups, very active. A lot of times you find when there is active hate, sometimes there's also fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of the other, right? There's this othering that takes place. Fear is a lot of times rooted. And so part of the beauty of cultural humility is it pushes all of us to take the time to get to know each other more, so then when biases and hate start to play in our minds, we have different narratives that come in to stop and to mitigate that. They've continued to do visual exercises and tests across occupations now, where they'll show images of different races and ethnicities. And then they have positive and negative terms, and they ask people to correlate, but they do this very fast. And they do it for a long period of time, to a point where soon it's kind of this unconscious, you just answering, right, from a very authentic sense. And they found we have a lot of work to do. We still have a lot of biases and a lot of active forms of stereotypes and prejudice. A lot of that is still coming from media. It's taught to us even through our schools, curriculum. There are different ways that we're soaking that in. They also found it's very internalized. So it's not just white people who carry this, but even Black and brown people have internalized some of these messages against Black and brown people, right? Even themselves. So it's really interesting to start to think about this, and the same can be said looking at gender, sexuality, thinking about linguistic diversity, all of these different social identities that we carry as humans. So I have a short video clip here I want to share with you. And this is Medina Jackson. She is a director of engagement with a Pride program, but does a lot with cultural humility.
With cultural humility, the goal is to lower your own sense of self-importance, to be open to receive other people and other people's way of life, to be present, to be listening, to be open, to see. We are all equals and we each have skills to share. You're talking about developing a partnership. I have something to give and you have something to give, and what are we going to create from that? It's not coming in as if you have all the answers because you're at the university, and I have none of the answers because I am from a minority community. You have to be relaxed, you have to be humble, you have to come not to a lower level, but to a level that people can understand what you're saying, can understand that you want to be there. Body language is such a big thing. If you're not comfortable, then you need to go into a community with people that are comfortable, so you can see how they act, what type of clothes they wear, how they speak to people. Whether you're a professor, or whether you're a student or a staff person, or whatever your station is, there may be this kind of sense, within our egos that we need to approach communities that we're working with a sense of knowing everything, of being the teacher. And in cultural humility, it's okay to not know, and it's okay to ask a question. It doesn't mean that you're not intelligent, it just means that you may not know something. So I think it's just important to approach folks who may have different social identities in that way, with a sense of openness, with a sense of listening and really seeing, listening to understand instead of listening to talk and teach, and occupying the space of being a true learner. I think that's important. Please remember that we are all equals and we each have skills to share. So even though we may not have all of the book knowledge that a university student has, we still have a lot of knowledge and skill, and we're still moving forward. And we need assistance with moving forward. And there's probably a lot the university students could learn from us too.
So I shared that with you because it's something that I actually share that piece with my own students. And here's why, right? For a very, very long time, even when we've talked about doing good in the world, often it has operated from a space of self-centeredness, right? And so it's well-intentioned, but sometimes people go in and they say, we're gonna fix this community, right? Things are not going well, we're gonna come and fix it. And so, we want to change that to say we want to work with, right? There's a difference between, coming in and fixing the community or working with a community. Honoring that everybody has strengths and skill sets, right? And we can learn from each other. And so there's a big difference, and equity calls on us to make sure that we are taking time to also not expect everybody around us to always assimilate to what we think is normal, what's been normalized to us, but that we're also willing to be open and to learn and to acknowledge that different people have different norms, even talking about nonverbals, right? It's really interesting, understanding that if we're gonna go to a different country or a different community somewhere, we want to take time to understand so we can be respectful and understand things in that community. And all around the world we have different, so I'll give you a very simple example, right? So if I did this, what do you all think I'm saying to you? If somebody says something, I'm like, yeah, right? So you all got, yeah, you're okay, yeah, good. In different cultures, that has different meanings. Right? And so, it can mean the number 0 and it's a banking sign. It can mean even more magnified than the middle finger. So you don't want to go around doing that, right? And so it's really, really interesting. In fact, I had a student who's from Brazil, an international student. And, another student did this and they just got so upset and burst. This was during the student organization meeting because they were really took it. They said, and everybody was so confused. What happened in this dynamic, right? And so, again, pause. Let's learn from each other. Let's understand that we all have different perspectives. There's a really great cartoon where they draw the number 6, but if you're standing over here, what number are we seeing? 9, right? And so some of this is also understanding we all have different lenses that are shaped in different ways. We're diverse as humans. Again, to quote Maya Angelou, let's not forget, though, in diversity, there is beauty and there is strength. We have to allow that beauty and strength, though, make space for that. So here is just looking at, this is called the tripartite model of cultural humility. Again, you have intrapersonal, interpersonal, and so this just talks about, you start with the inward. This is where we're saying we're going to take time to really think about and understand ourselves. The different things that have shaped our lives, the biases that we may carry, that the only way to kind of mitigate and address bias is to start to recognize it. And we all have it, every single human being, right? We all have it. And so part of it is, this is work, right? It's work. And then you move into outward. And that's where we're challenging power imbalances. We're advocating, right? We have activism. I love coming to the UU, right? Yeah, I love all your signage, your spirit, right? You're willing to be an activist and to challenge, and we need that in our world, right? We need people who have moral courage. We need people who are truth tellers. In fact, I'll just do a little plug. We were able to get a phenomenal exhibit over at the DeLand Museum of Art, and it'll be up till December. If you have an opportunity, I'm gonna highly recommend that all of you take a moment and go over to the DeLand Museum of Art, the one that's right across Stetson, and go see this exhibit by Robert Shetterly. Robert Shetterly is an artist who has gone around, and the exhibit is called Americans Who Tell the Truth. And you have these beautiful portraits where he's taken time to paint So many different people, including people from history, Dr. King, Claudette Colvin, who was 15 years old and inspired Rosa Parks to do the sit-in on the bus. A lot of people don't know that, right? Claudette Colvin was 15 and she inspired Rosa Parks. You have Rosa Parks, right? So many amazing people kind of on these, but then also current day activists as well. It's just a really beautiful exhibit, and you have written piece that accompanies each, but very, very inspiring. So I recommend, and if you don't have a chance to get over there, go to the website and look it up. I think you'll really enjoy it. Just like the book I recommend, I'm so glad you listen to my recommendations. It's like, oh, yay! You know, as a teacher, that's your hope, right? You're like, oh, that's awesome. But you can go to the website, Americans Who Tell the Truth by Robert Shetterly, and you'll be able to pull up, you can see all of it online as well, right? But it's beautiful, really beautiful. But again, it's going back and saying we need to have people who are truth tellers, who have moral courage, especially today when you see all the crises in our world. But again, look at the center. What aligns and connects here is openness, and then the other piece is the accountability. And it's also holding ourselves accountable. We're not going to be perfect. We're humans. We're all going to make mistakes, right? Especially when it comes to other humans. We are complex beings. But what matters is we hold ourselves accountable and say we can learn and grow. And if I've hurt somebody, I can say, I'm sorry, right? That's a beautiful thing. I always say children are some of our best teachers. You watch children and they do so much right, so organically. They remind us about simple joys. They remind us about imagination. They remind us about being humble and inquisitive. And even this ability to say sorry, right? Often little children, they recognize when they've hurt somebody, I'm sorry, right? And it comes out and it's sincere. So we need to go back to a lot of that. And I think we can learn from our children in so many ways. This is another piece I just put in here as a resource for everybody. This is called The Experience of Difference. It comes out of Bennett's work. And it starts by, here is ethnocentrism, right? Where you have a denial of other cultures and people. And you think about a lot of genocide and hate that's happened in our world. There's been a real cultivation of this. And it's not just the people who are actively partaking in evil, it's all the people who are silent too, who are complicit, right, in ways. And then you kind of move up to defense, minimization, acceptance, adaptation, integration. And I'm going to say, you go on here, even off the chart, you're going to have belonging, equity, justice, right? You can really feel the sun shining over here. And this moves into ethno-relativism, okay? Understanding that we're all interdependent and connected. Again, a UU principle, right? I love the principles at UU. They're beautiful. Okay.
Before we can talk about equity versus equality, I want to first define diversity. At Inclusive Communities, we like to say diversity in its simplest definition means differences. We all have differences, from our glasses to our weight to how much money we have. That is diversity, and no matter how much people say it's hard to find diversity, that's not true. Diversity exists. It's about taking the time to acknowledge its existence and work to ensure action is taken to embrace these differences, not alienate them. Equality is often equated to fairness and sameness, and is based in the misconception that we all have the same needs and the same solution will work for everyone. Equity is based in access and opportunity, with the understanding that we each start with different advantages and disadvantages, and thus have different needs to attain access and opportunity. To understand equity, we have to compare it to equality. Now, I love this equity versus equality graphic, as it's the best explanation of the difference between the two. On the equality side, you see that we've got three individuals, our tall guy, our short girl, and our friend in the wheelchair. And you see that they're all trying to watch this baseball game, but there's this fence. With equality, they've each been given a box to use to be able to see the game. But obviously that's not working, because our tall friend is now super tall and sees very clearly over the fence, while our short girl can just barely see, and she's still kind of on her tiptoes and struggling to see the game, while the person in the wheelchair can't see it all and they can't even get on the box. On the equity side of this picture, you can see that now we've given each individual exactly what they need to be able to see the game. The person in the wheelchair has a ramp, so they can clearly get to the top and see the full game. The shorter girl has two boxes, which is what she needed to comfortably be able to see, and the tall person has no boxes at all because they didn't need the extra assistance in the first place. Equity is a process, which means it is continuous. We can't gain equity by changing just one thing. For example, the equity side of this photo shows our friend in the wheelchair has gained equity at this fence, but the work is not done. True progressive equity is about how can we ensure that he has equitable opportunities at all of the hypothetical and real fences in his life. Equity requires power, resources, and social responsibility to work hand in hand to change the structures and provide opportunities to those who were institutionally left out, marginalized, or oppressed. Equity is hard, but it's essential for us to make change in the lives of those who have been historically depicted as less than. From individuals with disabilities like physical, developmental, and mental, to people living in poverty without access to food or education or healthcare. It's important for us to understand that there is a long history of discrimination, which has created the present day inequities which don't allow these individuals the same access to opportunity than those who don't have those differences. One of the greatest gifts that we give to students that we work with is the opportunity to share their story and to find value in their voice. And this increases awareness and a sense of empowerment. Everyone has their own stuff. Everyone is going through something that challenges their emotional and physical capacity to be great, but there is power in connection. So now here's your challenge. Be brave and seek out those opportunities to have authentic conversations with those that are different than you. Find out what makes them unique and what brings them joy. Then you do the same. Share your story because you have value as well. Now you've built community. And with community, we have power. We is always stronger than me.
So I wanted to share that. I think it gets at, again, this idea of connection, community, which is at the heart of cultural humility. And also this idea in Sanskrit, we actually have a saying. Sanskrit is one of the oldest languages of the world. It comes from India. But we have, many concepts. But one of the phrases really translates to, again, if you take the I off illness and put we, you get wellness. There's this kind of beauty, right? You take the I off illness, we, wellness. And so, again, this idea that we need each other. And we need to be able to support one another and learn from one another. And there's strength and power and beauty in that. I do a lot of research around this, and I basically am talking here about the individual and collective work that has to be done to advance justice, but how cultural humility plays a big part of that, right? Again, it's that honoring of stories. Now, I want to share one of the big barriers we find now for people to actually be in a space of cultural humility is actually people have a hard time being present. We live, again, in one of the noisiest times in human history. Noisiest times. We are all so distracted. They are finding it is very hard for us as humans now to pay attention, right? We have our devices, we have a million things. It's almost like if you have a computer with a bunch of tabs open, they're saying we all are walking around with a million tabs, right, just open. Because we are in an information overload world, and a world that is just go, 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 go. Right? And a lot of times we've forgotten about the importance of community, beloved community, sangha, Sanskrit concept, right, of community. And so again, how do we slow down? Right? The poem I shared with Joe today that was shared was by Mary Oliver, I Worried. And I picked that with intention because I think so many of us, we are living in a state also of worry. Constant worry. Even when we don't know we're worried, we are worried. And we have reason to be worried in many cases, right? When you look at the fractures, deep, deep fractures in our world. But here's the thing, if we're always in a state of worry, we deprive ourselves of the gift of being present. And so sometimes, as Mary Oliver put it, we just have to take our old bodies and go outside and sing and be in that sun, right? We just have to do it. And part of that is also suspending our fear and worry when we are around others to be able to listen more openly and get to know them, right? To be not as scared of each other, but to say we're going to be open. We're going to try to learn. We're going to welcome and be inclusive. You know, talking about diversity, this day and age, diversity is a fact. Inclusion is an act, right? It takes action. It's a verb. It's a verb. So I could go on and on all day, but I'll end here, and I just will share with you, again, there's so much that we can do as humans. And I think one of the best ways we can all start to do more with equity and justice in our world is making sure that we are cultivating and embracing cultural humility in our own lives. Continue to learn, continue to listen, continue to love. There's so much power in that. I'll finish with a very short stanza from a poem of mine that I wrote. Look at me. I look at you. We are moksha dolls that walk around nesting. The reality is we are journeying forward together. And when I see you with your ta-ta, ta-ta, I stop. And at first I worry. I think, what is this? I think, I don't understand. But then I remind myself that we are born into this world with curiosity. That when we step into the unknown, sometimes we see the most beautiful landscapes that there ever has been. Masterpieces to unfold and treasure and savor, to be able to radiate from the top of mountains and in the deepest, deepest treasures of oceans. And I remind myself, instead of stepping back, I'm going to step forward. And I'm going to say, tell me about this. And let me also share a bit about myself. We are all walking each other under the expansive skies, on the same ground. Let's love a little more and fear